Tonight we cover Ephesians 3 and 4. If you didn't get my email, that we're covering 2 chapters tonight, which is different than the first 2 weeks, right? We covered 1 chapter per week, but now we're covering 2 chapters this week. So, and we'll click through it. If you remember, the first time we got together, I said that Ephesians was like a mini catechism. So the first 3 chapters were about theology, about what the faith is, and the second 3 chapters were how to live out that faith. So we jump over the hump tonight. We end the theology part, which is mental, and we flip over to the faith, how to live out the faith, which is much easier to understand. So if you've been struggling, and you will struggle for a little bit as I start talking tonight, if you've been struggling, it gets easier about halfway through tonight, and then it'll be easy for the rest of the talk. And if it's been real easy, then we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Okay, so as I emailed out, the main topics for tonight are mystery, eternity, unity, and truth. And one of my favorite adjectives of all time, which we'll get to when we get to it. Okay, so mystery, eternity, unity, and truth. We start off with Ephesians chapter 3, verses 1 through 3. And this is the opening to the 3rd chapter of the theology portion where he's teaching us about the faith. And if there's any English majors in the room, I dare say that what's up there is not actually a sentence, it's a sentence fragment. Drives me crazy because I try and make sense of it. There's still good stuff to get out of it, but it drives me crazy as I try and read it. He says, for this reason, and he says for this reason because he's coming off of chapter 2. If you recall what was at the end of chapter 2, he was saying that now the faith is open to the entire world. The dividing wall of hostility is down. All of the world is united in faith. So, for this reason, I, Paul, a prisoner for Christ Jesus, on behalf of you Gentiles, non-Jews, assuming that you have heard, or I'll try and make it grammatically correct. I assume that you have heard of the stewardship of God's grace that was given to me for you, how the mystery was made known to me by revelation, as I have written briefly. That slight change makes it an actual sentence, which satisfies me and makes my heart calm. Okay? Okay? So, I assume that you have heard of the stewardship of God's grace that was given to me for you. Stewardship. We hear about that in church. What is stewardship? Well, the Greek word that is translated as stewardship is oikonomia. Think about an English word that sounds like that. Oikonomia. Economy. Exactly. That's where we get the word economy from. Okay? So he's saying he's been handed the economy of God's grace. How do we make sense of that? Well, if someone was a steward in the household in someone's household, being a servant, a steward, they would be responsible for managing the resources of that house. In Greek, that would be an oikonomeo, if my pronunciation is correct. Same Greek word, same root word. So a steward would be responsible for managing properly the resources of someone else. I assume that you have heard of the stewardship of God's grace that was given to me for you. God's grace is what I'm responsible to manage on your behalf. It's been given to my stewardship to make sure I'm handling it for you. So stewardship is fun, oikonomeo is fun, or oikonomia is fun. Thought I'd throw that out. But let's get into the first main topic of the night. Stewardship of God's grace that was given to me for you, how the mystery was made known to me by revelation, as I have written briefly. I mentioned when we hit mystery in the first chapter that we'd come back to it. Because in Ephesians, Paul uses the word mystery 6 times, more than in any other letter. And that word mystery, does anybody remember? There was a pastor that I knew that called it something. Does anybody happen to remember? He called mystery God's secret. So a mystery is God's secret, or the mysteries are God's secrets. A mystery is not something that we can't know. A mystery is not in itself unknowable, but it is only knowable by revelation. When God wants to reveal his secret, we can know it. Before then, there's no way we can figure it out. That's the definition of a mystery. This is something that God has had all this time, and at some point, at the appropriate time, and in the fullness of time, he reveals it to us, and then it's a known mystery. There are still unknown mysteries, but you'll have to figure out which one is which. In this case, the mystery that Paul is talking about is the fact that the faith is now opened up to the entire world. That's been revealed now. He just finished talking about at the end of chapter 2, which is why he starts by saying, for this reason. And then after these 3 verses, he goes on for the next 9 verses, I think, continuing to talk about this. From verse 4 to about verse 13, he's discussing the fact that now it's open to both Jew and Gentile. That dividing wall of hostility is broken down, and everyone has access to the faith. The Gentiles have access to the faith through their faith. That is their entry point. And if you recall from last week, it's not a matter of becoming Jewish in order to be into the faith. It's a matter of having faith. It's a matter of believing. And that whole long discussion I had about that word believe, or does anybody remember the Greek word? Pisteuon. Okay? I love that word. I love that word. So the way the Gentiles are grafted into the family, if you want to call it that, is through faith, believing the gospel message, adopting the worldview of the Son, being persuaded by the message, entrusting themselves to the message. Everything we talked about last week. A little bit later on, we're not going to cover 4 through 13 because we've got a lot of ground to cover. 4 through 13 is summed up as a little bit more of a discussion about what chapter 2 ended with, that the fact that it's open up to the whole world right now. But in verse 11, Paul talks about that all of this is happening according to the eternal purpose of the Father. So according to the eternal purpose, we're going to get to this word eternal and eternity, right? That's the second big topic for tonight. According to the eternal purpose of God that is now revealed in the Son in time. In time is separate than eternal. And we're going to try and make sense of those two things. Because this is the last hard thing to wrap your head around. Okay? It's going to be sort of fun. We're going to talk about this for a few minutes. But it's important because it makes sense of other things. So we're going to give it a shot. Another example of mystery, these things about mystery, revelation, eternal purpose, also show up in another passage that's read at Mass, I don't want to say frequently, but at least every 3 years, because that's the pattern, but I think it's more often than that. This is one that is rather common, and we know parts of it as soon as we hear it. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 7 through 10. And there's a couple of ellipses in here because I cut out a couple things that don't apply to this. Okay? But here's the thing. See if you can see the parallels that happen here. And this is still Paul speaking because Paul wrote 1 Corinthians. He says, "We speak God's wisdom, mysterious, hidden, which God predetermined before the ages for our glory." Sounds like an eternal plan, right? "As it is written," and here's the part that you're going to remember because you've heard it before, "What eye has not seen, and ear has not heard, and what has not entered the human heart, what God has prepared for those who love him, this God has revealed to us through the Spirit." Mystery revealed. We couldn't figure this out. This could not enter the human heart on our own power. But that mystery has been revealed to us through the Holy Spirit. Now, I think that's kind of cool because some people only quote this section and say, we can't know anything about heaven. We can't know anything. And they forget this last part. No, it's now been revealed to us, at least some of it, through the Spirit. So, that's two parts of it. But there was one more part, which was that eternal plan, and that comes in that word predetermined. There's also predestined. In chapter 1, we were talking about chosen and destined and appointed, and all of these words that sound like God is controlling things, as opposed to us having free will. So which is it? He's got an eternal plan. We fit into it. He knows what's going on. Is he forcing us to do this? Are we going through this? And some people say yes, and some people say no. So let's see if we can go through this. God and time. We'll talk about God and time. This is the little section on eternity. We're taking a little bit of a tangent, but it does connect into what we're talking about. But a little bit of a tangent. We tend to anthropomorphize things. It's a big word. Some of you might know it. Some of you might not. I'll explain it for those of you who might not know what that word means. Anthro means man. Morphize, change into. When you anthropomorphize something, you give something, you assign human qualities to something where it's not deserved. If your refrigerator tends to blink out on you on just the wrong moments, you might say, oh, it's mad at me. It's not mad at you. You've anthropomorphized your failing refrigerator. Okay, you get the idea? You're assigning human quality to something that shouldn't get that human quality. We do that to God sometimes. We assign to God a quality that we have that he doesn't have. Time is one of those things. God does not experience time the same way we do. He is in eternity. That's not the full explanation, guys. We're gonna go further than that. What does that mean? Does that mean that he simply existed a long time before us? No, it means more than that. He just exists. There is no before. There is no what he was like a year ago, what he was like 1 billion years ago. He just is, right? I like that. He just is, right? Everything to him is the present moment. And it's hard for us to wrap our heads around it because we don't live that way, okay? So I'm going to walk through a couple of things and maybe hand you a couple of analogies that might help us grasp that a little bit, because that's one of those mysteries that we have been made aware of, but it's still hard for us to grasp because it's not the way we experience things. We experience time by walking through it. Okay? He doesn't. He has a unique overview of time. We walk through it. He looks down upon it. If you go to Genesis chapter 1, you'll hear that he created the heavens and the stars and the seas and the oceans and the moon and the sun and all the rest of the kinds of things. I probably repeated myself a couple of times there. The birds and the animals, all of these different things. But if you go all the way to the beginning of Genesis 1, you'll realize that God created time and space itself. Now, in order to create time and space, you have to be standing on something outside of time and space. I'm speaking figuratively. God isn't standing on something. But he is outside time and space. He created something which he can look into. He doesn't walk through time the way we do. We're born, if I go this way, it's correct to me. If I do this way, it's correct to you. We're born, and then we become a toddler, an infant, then we become a toddler, then we become, whatever all these stages are, young kid, an adolescent, all the young adult, etc., and you move on. We walk through this. We walk through our life, okay? The only thing that's present to us is the present moment. We can remember things that happened in the past, if our memory's good, okay? We can remember that stuff that happened in the past because we experienced it and we have a memory. But it's not present to us at the moment. We only live in the present. And we have no clue what's happening tomorrow or next year. We think we might know what's happening tomorrow, but we've been surprised. Have any of us been surprised at what happens the next day So we don't know what the future is. Okay, so we walk through. Imagine there's a little box for every day that you live, and each day you move to the next box, and you're able to operate within that box. Complete free will to do whatever you want in that box as you move through. But you can only see the box that you're in, and you can remember the boxes that you've been in. You have no idea what's up through here. God, on the other hand, is standing over top and can see all the boxes. He sees your whole life as one moment. You are one entity to him. Timeless, completely timeless. How does it factor into free will? Let me get to Brett. Do you have a question?
Yes. Tell me if I'm getting a bit off topic here, but you mentioned that God is eternal.
Yes.
Are scientific laws, like the law of gravity or the concept of numbers, are those eternal as well? They're immutable?
No. Why? I love being able to answer a question that affirmatively. Okay? Anybody think I was going to say yes to that? The answer is no, because those laws of gravity, all those laws came into being when the universe was created. God existed before then. Therefore, the universe has a moment in time that it started. Therefore, it's not eternal. Okay? So we, for instance, aren't eternal. We will live on for eternity, but we had a defining moment when we came into being. God doesn't have one of those. He is what is. So it's hard for us to wrap our head around. Anyway, so here we are walking through the boxes of our life. God can see over top of that and see the whole thing. He can see how we operate with free will on that day, and he can see how we operate with free will on that day. He does not change, he does not affect us, unless he has a particular reason to enter our lives and create some sort of a miracle. He can just has the ability to do it. He doesn't have to shift into some weird mode and shift through time. He's just standing outside of time, okay, looking into time. So he sees us all at one time. As I tell this story, if anybody recognizes this story and can tell me where it came from, please tell me after I finish talking. There's a story that I recall, and there's one particular part of it that I want to get across because I think it's kind of cool, and I can't remember where it came from. I don't remember. It was an article I read or a Christian movie I watched. I can't remember. But the main portion, the main concept of it was that there was a little girl who suffered some sort of an accident, fell out of a tree or something, and for a short time was declared dead, and was dead, but was revived a few hours later, if I remember correctly. When she was revived, she, perhaps not at the moment she arrived, but a little bit later on, she told her mom that while she was dead, she visited Grandma in heaven, whom she had never met on earth because her grandma had died before the little girl was born. And, well, that was kind of interesting. And her mom was like, okay, this is interesting. And then they went to the family photo albums, which for some reason this little girl had never seen. And when they opened it up and they go through the pages, when they get to Grandma, oh, there's Grandma. So she's able to recognize Grandma. Oh, that's kind of cool. Okay, flip through. And I don't know why she'd never seen these family photo albums, but that's another story. So she's going through this. So that's the general gist. But here's the cool part. The little girl described to her mom that when she met Grandma, Grandma was at one time an infant, a toddler, a young child, an older child, an adolescent, a teenager, a young adult, a middle-aged adult, and an old person. When she looked at Grandma, she saw all of that at one time. Now, I have a hard time picturing that. If anybody here is an artist, I challenge you to draw that. Okay? How do you do that? But see, and this is quite interesting. If I told the story well enough, you can understand what I'm saying, even though you can't actually picture it. Right? I every once in a while, I try and picture that. It's kind of odd. But it does give us a feel, a little bit, I think, of how God sees us. He sees us as an entity, as a block. All of those times, it's completely timeless. I have that same sensation, to a certain extent, when I look at Lucy. We've been together over 40 years. I see her, I see the 19-year-old that I met. That's all I see. That's all I see. Okay? It doesn't help the fact that she goes like this, really cutesy, which she's doing right now. She's trying to distract me back there. Okay? It doesn't help with it, but that's what I see. I see she's timeless to me, absolutely timeless to me. Okay? Hopefully there's somebody in your life that's just absolutely timeless. That's that person. That's just that person. And you just don't notice the years going by. Yes, Brian?
Another question.
Yes.
Is that love that does that to someone?
I can't answer that as affirmative as I did the last one. I would imagine yes, and in my case yes, because I am not acting in eternity. Okay, perhaps God gives me that timeless feature, with Lucy, but it's not. I don't see her timelessly for the same reason God sees us timelessly. Okay, although we both have love for Lucy. Okay, I'd like to say that I love her more than God, but I'm wrong. God loves her more than I do. Okay. And she reminds me of that all the time. That's not true. She's going to hit me for that later on. I'm just making that up, I promise. Okay, so we anthropomorphize, we walk through time, God looks down on time. He sees each of us as a block or a single entity, as a single enemy. Okay, I'm gonna have to erase that from the video. He knows what you're gonna have for lunch tomorrow, because he can already see the next box. Sharon, I told you we're gonna talk about what you're having for lunch tomorrow. He knows what you're having for lunch tomorrow. Does anybody here already know what you're gonna have for lunch tomorrow? You just sort of plan out your days. You know what Friday is. You've already got it packed at home, ready to go to work. Okay, you might change your mind, but God already knows what you're going to eat at lunch tomorrow. Does that mean He's directing your free will? No, He's just outside of time. He can look down in that box. We don't have that power. He does. He's not affecting our free will by being able to see what's happening tomorrow. He's just able to do it. It's not that He already knows, He just knows. Anytime I try and describe this, I always end up throwing in those time words, which is wrong. He doesn't already know. God is outside of time. He hasn't known since then. He hasn't known for 100 years. He hasn't known even since the beginning of time. He just knows. Always the present moment, because it's from eternity. From all eternity, not just for a long time, okay? In order for him to interact with us in time at all, he has to enter time, like what he did with his son, and act in time for our benefit at a particular moment. And I've got no analogy for that because I have no clue how to describe that. He does that for us out of love at the appropriate time. Anything that we will ever do, He has already known since the beginning of time. His knowledge, I mentioned this already, so He's known all that. And His foreknowledge does not interfere with our free will. I've already covered it. I'm ahead of myself by two clicks. He just simply has access to the result of our free will. And that affords Him some privileges when it comes to being able to love us and give us gifts. For instance, every single one of the prayers that you've ever said in your life, He knows. The prayer that you will say tonight before you go to sleep, He knows. The prayer that you will say for the next year, all the prayers you say, He already knows. Every prayer you say for the rest of your life, He already knows. Why is that so important? His plan for humanity, His plan for your life, His plan for everything has taken into account every prayer you'll ever say. All the ones you've already said and all the ones that you haven't even thought of yet. Okay? Why is that important? Well, here's an analogy. Imagine a parent who, and this is going to be different for different people of different financial backgrounds, but imagine a parent who is looking out for their child who's a youngster and knows that this youngster at a certain age they're going to want to buy a car for the first time, and the youngster may not have enough money to do it, all on their own. So the parent starts putting away money so they can help with either the down payment or buying a clunker for the kid or whatever at the right time. Before the kid even wants the car, before the kid is even interested in cars, the parent knows that at some point so they start acting earlier than even the request is. The fact that God knows what prayer you're going to say tonight already, and He's known for your entire life, means that He who loves you more than anyone else loves you may have already been putting things in place in order to grant that prayer. He may have been doing this for years to get in place for you to answer your prayer that you have tonight or next year. Does that make sense? Okay. That's how much love He's got for us, and He's got that extra outside of time, eternity. It's hard to wrap our heads around eternity, again, like I said. Okay. And this is the thing. Words fail to describe it completely. I'm giving it my best shot. Okay? If you grasp a portion of it, it will help in what I'm about to say. Okay? Or in what I'm about to say when I'm finished with this. Okay? So if you grab a portion of it, that's great. If you grab all of it, that's great. If you're past me, that's even better. But words fail to describe it completely. I can only go so far. I'll give you an example. If I took this cell phone, it's really cool. Okay? I'm 58. When I was young, some of you in this room, when I was as young as you guys were, we didn't have these things. Okay? Really cool. I've been working with computers since I was in 8th grade. But computers were much bigger then. And now I look at this thing, it's amazing technology. Okay? But I'm close enough in time to understand this. Okay? I'm close enough in time to actually program it if I want to. But the idea is, this is a really cool technology. I understand this. Imagine, if you will, you take you can time travel back to the 17th century, and you go back to what was the scholastic center of the world back then? Paris, perhaps? Does anybody happen to know? Is it Paris? So all the greatest scholars in the world are studying at Paris, at the École de whatever it is. Okay, and you go back there with your cell phone, and you gather the greatest scholars in the world around, and you say, "Let me show you," and you start playing Angry Birds, and you look things up on Google, you show them how to play a game, you show them how to add numbers, you do all these kinds of things, and they're just like, they're just standing there with their jaws are dropped. They can see it because it's in your hand. For this example to work, you got to pretend that you have cell service in 17th century France. I realize that's a little bit of a problem, but go along with me for the purpose of the understanding. So you've gone back, you're talking to the most brilliant people on the planet in 17th century France. You show them a cell phone. Then you take the cell phone, you put it in your back pocket, and you say, write down a description of what you just saw. They don't have the words. They wouldn't have the words. Can you imagine what they would write? Sorcery. You're absolutely right. It'd just be one word, sorcery. Burn him tomorrow. But get that thing because it's really cool. Okay? You're absolutely right. It's sorcery. But if they tried, and they didn't want to burn me at the stake, they would try, and they'd probably be using flowery language. They'd be using poetic language. Okay? Has anybody in here, either for fun or for Bible study, read the book of Revelation? Is there flowery language in that book? Why is that? The official name for the book of Revelation, I think, is the revelation of Jesus Christ to the Apostle John. Jesus took John into heaven, showed him the cell phone, took him into heaven, brought him back and said, write a book. And John went, words fail. What I've just seen, I cannot put in words, but I'll try. And even with the help of the Holy Spirit, there aren't words in Greek or in English or whatever to describe what he saw. He's just limited by the fact that we don't have the ability to communicate it. Okay? So eternity is one of those things. If you got part of the way there, great. Okay? Why is that? Do words fail when it comes to understanding, does God predestine us to do things? Or does God simply know what's going to happen? We see words in the Bible like elect, chosen, the people, the elect. And people sometimes say, well, that means that God has chosen these people, and these are the people that are going to go to heaven. God has chosen them from the beginning of time to be the chosen ones that are going to go to heaven. Or God has seen, exactly. God has seen from all time. He's going to give grace to every single one of these boxes. Imagine all these boxes of humans. He's going to give the grace to every single one of these people. And he knows, because he can see over top, who is going to take advantage of that grace, who's going to cooperate with that grace. He knows who the elect are. Because when are the elect actually chosen? The elect are chosen the moment after we die. We meet Jesus, and whatever clipboard he has in his hand, whatever we've done, whatever we've cooperated with, whatever it is, and I won't go into the final judgment, at that moment in time, we are either chosen for one place or the other. Okay? Or maybe a third place. There's another story there, but we won't go there. Okay? So we know at that point in time whether we are chosen, whether we're going to be going to heaven. But chosen then to God, is the same thing as chosen now. He's timeless. So he knows now who in this room, hopefully all of you, who in this room is going to hold on to him their whole life, who's going to cooperate with the Holy Spirit, going to cooperate with grace, and is going to be there and succeed at the end. Like Paul says, I pummel myself so that I won't be disqualified, right? So we're going to be saved now, we're going to work on it, and we're going to be there in the end. He knows that already. So therefore, even now, he can call you his elect. Not because he's chosen you, because you've chosen yourself. Okay? The example, or an analogy for me, I love these father and son analogies. Have you figured this out? Okay, the father and son, and there's a father and the older son, the younger son and the older son. Now we're going to go with a father and a bunch of kids. Okay? So imagine a father and like 7 kids. This is a loving father who's successful, wants the best for his kids. And he's sitting around the dining room table with his 7 kids, and a good, loving human father is going to say something along the lines of, provided his children are old enough to understand this, I want the best for you. I'm going to do everything I possibly can to help you succeed. It's going to be up to you, but everything I can possibly do for each one of you. I love you. Okay? But the folks that believe in predestination or double predestination believe that it's all up to God, that we have no free will, because they misunderstand this idea of eternity, being able to know what the elect are in advance, etc. So what they would say of that human father sitting with his 7 kids is that the loving human father says, you're going to heaven, you're going to hell, you're going to heaven, you're going to hell, you're going to heaven, you're going to hell, you're going to heaven. Is that 6 or 7? Is there one more in the gun? I can't remember.
Close enough.
Close enough? And I'm sorry if I told you you were going to hell. And it's just, I should have switched it around. I'm sorry. If any of you are really upset about that, see me afterward. I'll reverse it. Okay? But that's what the double predestination crowd believes, is that God has chosen, independent of anything these children do, that the Father decides whether they're going to heaven or hell. Completely removes free will out of the equation. I don't believe that. Okay? I believe in the fact that God can see in advance. So that human father, if let's say he was a time traveler, he was into that TV show Quantum Leap, he sort of leapt forward 40 years, saw how his kids, does anybody remember Quantum Leap? Okay, thanks, I'm not alone. He was able to leap forward 40 years and check out how his children have fared in life. And he would be able to come back to that table and go, you know what? I know that you succeeded, well, I'm going to reverse it now. That you didn't succeed, you succeeded, you didn't succeed, you succeeded, you didn't succeed, you didn't succeed, and there's one more that's off the end of it, okay? He'd be able to know that, okay? But he wouldn't be saying, I've chosen that for you. He'd say, you chose your path, I just happen to know what that path is. Okay? You see the huge distinction between those two things? But people can misunderstand that. You ever heard the term double predestination or double predestination? There are people who believe that God has removed our free will from the equation. And that just can't work, because free will is an absolute must. It's one of the biggest gifts we've ever been given. And it is absolutely required for things like love and faith. And love is the number one commandment he gives to us, and free will is required for love. And faith is how we get to heaven, and free will is absolutely required for faith. And God knows this. So we must have free will. It has to happen. Yet some people say, nope, we have no free will. I can't fathom that. For love to be love requires free will. Sharon, you love Randy. Randy, you love Sharon. Randy, if Sharon had no choice but to love you, it wouldn't mean the same. It just wouldn't mean the same. Okay? When I refer to you, do I have to refer to you as Deacon Randy when I make that? Okay.
No,
So,
I was Randy a long time before I
So that free will is what makes love love. That free will is what makes faith faith. Okay? Love is what is the greatest commandment, Jesus tells us that. And faith is how we get to heaven. Free will is required. So free will has to be there. So double predestination can't be right. Thus endeth the dissertation on eternity. Okay? So that's that. Next, because that takes us through verse 13. In verse 14, Paul says the second of two great prayers in Ephesians. Okay? He ended chapter 1 with a beautiful prayer. He ends chapter 3 with a beautiful prayer. In this prayer, he has 5 petitions, 5 requests that he makes of God on our behalf. Paul is praying for who? For the people who are studying this. Okay? For the people who are trying to get close to God. This is what I pray for them. I pray that they be strengthened with power through the Holy Spirit. I pray that Christ may dwell in their hearts through faith. I pray that we are able to comprehend the breadth, length, height, and depth. He doesn't say the breadth, length, height, and depth of what. He just leaves it there, so it's a little confusing, but that's what he prays for. Everything. That we know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge. And lastly, all of these things so that we may be filled with all the fullness of God. Those are the 5 things that Paul is asking for us. And because of eternity, it applies to us tonight as we're sitting in this room. Because God heard the prayer that was uttered by Paul back then, but it applies to us now. As he starts the prayer, okay, Ephesians chapter 4, verse, where am I? Chapter 3, verse 14. Find myself. For this reason I bow my knees before the Father, for whom every family in heaven on earth is named. That's a little bit of wordplay. If you know your Greek, father is pater, family is patria. So when he's saying, from whom every family in heaven on earth is named, did you wonder when you read that, how in the world does he get that? Why is every family named after the Father? It's because it's the same root word. The root word of family is pater. So I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family on heaven and earth is named. Kind of cool. In verse 17, before that, we get to the first petition, that we be strengthened with power through the Spirit. Next Greek word. The word underneath power is dunamis, where we get dynamite from. Okay? The power of God is big power. That's why they named dynamite, to try and give dynamite the power of God. Okay? It's not that dynamite says that God is powerful. It's that they borrowed it from God. Okay? As a marketing gimmick. Although, still, dynamite is something to be cautious of. Lest you all go home and play with dynamite tonight. That's not me. Next one, verse 17, that Christ may dwell in our hearts through faith. I want to point out something because we talked at length about what faith was last week, right? It was to entrust yourself to Christ's message, to be persuaded by his words, and to adopt his worldview, right? You remember all that? Yeah. So if you're not careful, you might think that that's what Paul means by Christ may dwell in our hearts. His words dwell in our heart. Christ's words dwell in our heart. His worldview dwells in our heart. No, that's not what he means. He means Christ dwells in our heart. When we have faith, that opens the door. That opens the door. God is a gentleman. He won't force his way into your heart. But if you open the door through faith, Christ himself dwells in your heart. So opening yourself up to his message, adopting his worldview, is effectively opening the door and saying, come live with me. That Christ may dwell in our hearts through faith, through our free will. Please come live with me. That we comprehend the breadth, length, height, and depth. How many is that?
4.
We live in a world that has how many dimensions?
3.
There's an extra one here. How's that work? Now, as a math and science geek, I immediately thought, 4 dimensions. What's the fourth? Math and science geeks. What's the 4th dimension? Time. Exactly. I thought, hey, here we are, we're eternity. No, breadth, length, height, depth, none of that has to do with time. It's just the way they looked at things back then. And it's kind of, for me, as a math and science guy, it's kind of interesting. And the best way for me to wrap my head around it is think about a river. There's the breadth of a river, there's the length of a river, and then there's a height above the surface, and then there's the depth below the surface. Now, in modern ways of thinking, breadth is one dimension, length is one dimension, and height and depth are one dimension. But apparently back then, above the surface was one dimension, and below the surface was a different dimension. Interestingly, height and depth, height means to go up to heaven, and depth means to go down to mystery. So we're back at that word mystery again.
So don't you think they could all refer to faith then? And to describe, it's a prayer, so it says that they want Christ to dwell in our hearts through faith.
That we
And
comprehend the
faith
breadth,
is so
length.
big and so long and so wide and so
Exactly.
whatever.
I like that. I like that. I added the river to it, and Paul wasn't talking about a river. I was just trying to make an analogy, but that's a good point. Okay? He wants us to understand the breadth, the length, the height up to heaven, and the depth of mystery. I like that. I really like that. Okay? Check one for you. Okay? Sorry if I said you failed when I was going across the kids' table. I was going across the kids' table. I removed that. I removed that stigma from you. I
I'm
apologize.
sitting pretty close to her.
The gold star moves slightly in the direction of everyone close to you. Yes, Lourdes.
I don't know if it's helpful to anybody. My version of the Bible is a little older, but it says, so that you may be able to embrace with all the saints what is the width and length and height and depth of the charity of Christ, and even be able to know.
Okay, that might be the extension into the next one, the love of
Yeah.
Christ. That might be an extension into it. Again, translators didn't have commas and periods and punctuations, so sometimes they broke it in different places. The commas and stuff that we see and the breaks into sentences are the invention of the translators trying to do their best job. So if you get into something like Dewey Rames or something like that, they break it up differently. So we have to understand the larger message. Remember, we started tonight with a sentence fragment. Thanks for bringing that up. I appreciate that. Bobby, you were going to say something?
I just think of breath as ruach, like the Holy Spirit. So maybe we understand through the Holy Spirit the different dimensions.
That's a different word. We're not talking about breath, which is ruah. We're talking about breadth. So this is the broad breadth. They're very close in letters, but they mean different things. They mean different things. But ruah or pneuma in Greek. Good for you. You knew some Hebrew. Okay. So the breadth, length, height, and depth. Four dimensions, but it's not time, so it's not interesting. We'll move on. That we know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge. Are you guys getting tired of me throwing in little Greek words, or is it kind of fun? Okay, good. I enjoy it. Okay. The Greek word underneath surpasses is hyperbalusan, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Hyper means past, right? Balusan is where we get ballistic from. It means to throw. Okay, they didn't have guns back then, so it meant to throw. And then over time that became ballistics. Okay, so hyperbalusan is farther than you can throw. That we know the love of Christ farther than you can throw. It's just got a little bit more of a poetic meaning to it. I like those kinds of things. If that expanded your ability to understand the fourth line up here, great. If not, it was fun for me to say. So, farther than you can throw, because farther than you can throw was as far as there was in the ancient world. There weren't things past that. So as far as you can throw, you have to get into catapults and trebuchets, but that's later on. Okay, you have to like stand on a mountaintop and throw something off a mountaintop and invent. Farther than you can throw was farther than there is, kind of thing. It's a poetic way to say it. Lucy's looking at me like, I'm not sure, Greg, I'm not sure. We'll look it up, we'll see. Okay, great, okay.
They knew there was stuff further.
But yeah, they knew there was stuff further, but that was the extent of what you could accomplish. So that we know the love of Christ past what you could normally accomplish. How's that? Is that better? Is that a better way to say it? That surpasses knowledge, surpasses our human knowledge. And then the last one, do all of those things, or he asks all of these things so that the wrap-up, so that we may be filled with all the fullness of God. Okay? All of those things are good. And ask yourself for a moment, of those 5 things, which one is most important for you right now? Paul prayed this for you a little less than 2,000 years ago. And because of the eternity, it applies now. Which one of those 5 would be most important if God answered Paul's prayer on your behalf right now? Number 1, number 3, number 4. Do I have a 5? Do I have a 2? The people that go for 5, you're the greedy ones, because that encompasses all the rest. Okay? You're just being greedy. Or are you being clever? I don't know. We're supposed to be wise and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so think about that, okay? Because verse 20, the end of this prayer, says, now to him who, by the power at work within us, is able to do far more abundantly than all we ask or think. To him be the glory in the church and in Christ Jesus to all generations forever and ever. Amen. Paul is saying, this is no problem for God to grant in your life. Ask for these things. Ask for more than these things. God loves you. God wants to do these things for you. All you have to do is ask. It's not a difficulty for him. It's not an imposition. It's not a hardship. Those of you who have been parents, when your children come and ask you something that is in their best interest, but they need your help, are you willing to do it? Your grandkids, your nieces, your nephews, anybody who loves you? Yeah. And for us, it means that we have to take a little bit of time out of our lives. God is infinite. There's no sweat off his back. He loves it. He's a loving Father who wants to help. We just have to ask. Now, we finished chapter 3. We're moving on to chapter 4. And, wow, I'm on time. Look at this. Okay, so chapter 4, we switch to how to live. We're done with the theology. We're done expanding our brains that way. And now we start talking about how to live. There's going to be exhortations that are a little bit easier to understand. Okay? He starts by saying, I, therefore, he loves to remind everyone, I'm a prisoner on your behalf. Okay? I, therefore, a prisoner for the Lord. Actually, he's saying prisoner for the Lord. We're going to get to this in... Bless you. 2 per person per night. You've already used up 1. You only got 1 left. So, a prisoner for the Lord. We're going to get back to that in chapter 6. And I'd get ahead of myself if I try to explain, so I won't. I, therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, beg you to lead a life worthy of the calling to which you have been called. That's beautiful by itself. But then he says, with all lowliness and meekness, with patience, forbearing one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. The very first thing he calls us to is lowliness and meekness. It's the very first thing. After saying he wants us to live a life worthy of the call, he describes what that being worthy of that means. First thing, and it's not like he's just randomly throwing these things together. This is important. This came first. Lowliness and meekness. Lowliness is like humility. Okay? Lowliness. Now, when I was first putting the notes together for this talk, which was exactly 2 months ago for the folks up at the cathedral, I didn't realize something. Last week I used a Bible verse, and we went off and talked about it. And I only used the beginning of that Bible verse for a particular purpose. I didn't realize that it fit right into this, because I only did my notes one night at a time. Now I knew it was coming, even though I said it last night. But at the time, I didn't realize. I talked about Matthew 11:29. Nobody look at your Bible. Does anybody remember what it is? Matthew 11:29. Jesus says to take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Right? That yoke that you put over 2 oxen so they're both seeing the world the same way. That's the first part of that verse. Second part of that verse, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart. Meek and humble of heart, lowliness and meekness. They just switch the humble of heart, humility, lowliness, humility, meek, meek. Okay? Paul, I don't know if he meant to take this from the sayings of Jesus, or if the Holy Spirit said, this is the most important thing. Because, give me a sec. Because Jesus is saying here, he's describing his personality. He's describing his personality with the terms meek and humble of heart. To the best of my knowledge, and I might be wrong, but I remember hearing this somewhere, that when Jesus describes himself as meek and humble of heart, it's the only place in the Bible where he describes a personality trait of his. It's the only time he describes a personality trait. And we're supposed to emulate Christ, right? So Paul is saying, most important character trait, let me start off with the big one, lowliness and meekness. Meekness and humble of heart. Now, you say, okay, well, maybe it's just a coincidence. He's saying, do all these virtuous things. Here's the kicker, and this one's hard to believe. When I read this, I was really blown away, and I really still rented lips. Still can't quite wrap my head around this. But we'll start with lowliness or humility. The quality of being humble, the quality of humility, was something that was absolutely despised in the pagan world. This wasn't Paul or Jesus saying, do this virtue that everyone knows is a virtue. They're saying, do this thing that everyone in this world thinks is despicable. We now know that humility is a virtue because Christians have made us aware of that. In the pagan world, in the warrior world, and all of that, humility was looked as something as being despicable. So they weren't just trying to capture the imagination of people that wanted to be virtuous. They were saying just the opposite at the time. We now understand how important humility is. Christians were the very first people in the ancient world to consider humility a virtue.
Greg,
Yes,
before Paul converted, he was the complete opposite.
correct. Correct.
So this just shows the depth of the conversion when he met Jesus.
The depth, the height, the breadth, all of that, yes. Exactly, exactly.
Get back here, what was the question?
Oh, I'm sorry. He was saying that Paul, before his conversion, would have also thought this, that humility was despicable. Okay? Now, possibly because he was a devout Jew, there might have been a slight difference there because he wasn't fully pagan. He just wasn't Christian at the time. So maybe there was a straddle there. I'm not quite sure. But it's a very interesting point. So I've got in my notes, I recently heard, but this is as of 2 months ago when I first put these notes together. I recently heard, as of 2 months ago, someone describe, was talking about the attribute of the sin of pride. And what's the opposite of pride? Yeah, we've just been talking about it. So we all know that the counterbalancing virtue to the vice of pride is humility. But because I love trivia and I love throwing this stuff out, I'm gonna tease this one out because I thought it was interesting. He said, I don't think it's humility, although it's close. He would argue that the counterbalance is something different, but it comes from the same place. See, humility, the word humility comes from humus or earth. So for those of us who are humble, means we're grounded, means we're low to the ground, means we're down there, we're solid, okay? We're not putting ourselves up here to look down on people. Pride, you're up here looking down on people. And if you're humble, you're down there. So this person said, okay, pride, humility. But that aspect of pride looks down. If you're low to the ground and looking up at the Father, not thinking of yourself, but looking up at the Father, that's reverence. So the opposite of pride would be reverence. It comes from the same place because we're in that place, but it just means that we're looking in that direction. It's just an interesting thing to think about. Okay? Theologically, if we're going through our catechism, the opposite of pride is humility. But reverence is another interesting thing to think about because if you are humble, you have reverence. Because you're not relying on your own strength, you're looking up to the Father for help. Now that's yes, I'm sorry. Bray, you had a question a couple of minutes ago and I told you to hold on. I apologize.
Don't worry about it. So I'm just wondering, so considering that Jesus is God, what does it mean for Jesus to say, I am humble? Because he's got, I would think that naturally he's looking down on the rest of us. So what does that mean, that the Son of God is humble?
I'm going to answer in 20 seconds what could take an hour to describe. Jesus is both fully man and fully God. He is humble as fully man. To a certain extent, he's also humble even as God because he has condescended to be with us. Okay? When a human being is condescending towards you, that's a bad thing. They're up high looking down on you. Okay? They are with descending. Okay? Condescending. But when God, who is naturally higher than you, condescends so that he can live amongst us, that's an act of humility, isn't it? So even God, even in his godly portion, I went past by 20 seconds, didn't I? Even in his godly portion, he is being humble. I'm not quite sure if that's theologically correct, but certainly in his human portion, he's being humble. Okay? Where was I? Okay, so humility. We've talked about humility, reverence. We've thrown all those kinds of things. Now I'm going to describe to you one of my favorite adjectives of all time. Meek. Okay, you've heard Jesus describe himself as meek, right? And you think about turning the other cheek, and you turn about all this kind of stuff. And modern culture would like you to think, because they like to undermine everything, modern culture would like you to think that when Jesus says he's meek, he's weak. Meek and weak rhyme. It's so obvious. It's not true. Think about the last time you watched a movie about knights riding into battle on horseback with their broadswords and their armor and their lances and all of the chaos and all of the bloodshed and all the crazy stuff that they're riding in on their white steeds to do battle. Okay? Think about the chaos that's going on. Now think about that from the horse's point of view. The knights know what's going on. The horses don't know what's going on. The horses, if not trained properly, will break and run. The war horses, which are bigger and stronger than normal horses, go through a training process of being meeked. They take that enormous power and bring it under control. That's what meek means. Meek does not mean not being in control. Meek means having tremendous power under control. When Jesus says he is meek, he's saying, I could destroy all these people that want to hurt me, but I don't. Because there is a plan, and I'm going to follow what the Father wants me to do. I am under control. And that's what he asks of us. Go back to the end of the first chapter where Paul says that there's immeasurable, the prayer at the end, where there's immeasurable greatness in us, there's power in us that God gives us. We are called upon to use that properly, to bring it under control, that we're all powerful with control. Meek. Don't ever think that word meek means weak again. It's one of my favorite adjectives of all time. That whole thing that I just said to you was described by Father John Riccardo, who's just a brilliant man at being able to communicate ideas, and I just love the way he said that. I never look at the word meek again, the same way. I never look at it again. That's it. Throw it away. We're moving on. Okay, moving on. Next little section here. Verses 4 through 6. This is one sentence, and it is possibly the number one sentence in the entire Bible on the subject of unity. It says, there is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to the one hope that belongs to your call, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all of us, who is above all, and through all, and in all. That's unity. Pope John the 23rd said, what unites us is much greater than what divides us. What unites us is much greater than what divides us. Go back to chapter 1. What was the central part of chapter 1? What was God's plan for everything? To unite us back under Christ. What unites us, one. I missed one, I probably should. What unites us is much greater. I love that. I saw a while back the fact that when we're at Mass, you've got people of all different persuasions, all different classes, various socioeconomical and backgrounds and places they came from, and all of this stuff, and we're still kneeling together, worshiping one God. All of that is put aside. We are one when we are. It removes all of the barriers, all of the boundaries. We are diverse when we walk into the room. We are one when we are worshiping the Father. Diversity is great as long as God can make unity out of it. Diversity for its own sake is not good. Diversity means division. That's Satan's job. Unity is God's job. So the fact that we can be diverse but become unified, that's beautiful. That's the work of God. Okay? Diversity, no. Diversity that becomes unity, yes. That's what God wants. By the way, the third one, the first one on the second line, the one hope that belongs to your call, that doesn't mean our hope, our desire. That's not what that means. It's not our desire, our emotional feeling about what's coming up. What Paul is talking about, that word hope means the actual event that takes place in the future. The objective future blessing. What awaits us in heaven, okay? That we await. The second coming of Christ and life with God forever, that is the hope that we hope for, okay? So we do hope for that. But what he's talking about is that objective reality that waits for us, okay? So we share one body, one spirit, just as you were called to one hope. Next. Now, this one's fun, okay? And if you read this section, you were like, I'm not quite sure what to make of this. You're not alone. I'm with you, okay? And I've read a bunch of the different scholars, and they're sort of mixed on this. So, but let's take a look at this, because there's still something we can glean from this, even though we don't quite know what's going on. Paul starts, but grace was given to each of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. And then it seems like Paul goes off on a tangent for a moment before he comes back to the main thing. Sounds like when he got to the point of measure of Christ's gift, he said, oh, that reminds me of something. Therefore, it is said, he's now quoting Scripture. Scripture meaning Old Testament. In this case, Psalm 68, verse 8. He says, therefore it is said, when he ascended on high, he led a host of captives, and he gave gifts to men. Now, it's in the Old Testament, so you can't be talking about Christ, right? No, the Old Testament is full of Christ, okay? So, he ascended on high, and he led a host of captives, and he gave gifts to men. Scholars are differing on what all of this means and how it connects to Ephesians. The one that makes the most sense to me, and therefore I will share with you, but I can't say, this is it. But it's the closest one that makes sense to me, is that when the Israelites were led out of slavery, they also left with gifts, and the fact that they could leave itself was a gift, and they were led out by Christ, by a type of Christ, which was Moses, right? So when he ascended on high, he led a host of captives, right? Time melts away. When he, Jesus, ascended on high, he led a host of captives, because now time has melted away, and he's back leading everyone out of Israel. And he gave gifts to men. These are the gifts of the Spirit, and we don't know quite how that connects in. And then there's this parenthetical section, and there are no parentheses in the original Greek, so the translators put the parentheses in. But it seems like he's sort of saying this as a parenthetical statement, and I'll explain why in a sec. He says, in saying he ascended, what does it mean but that he had also descended into the lower parts of the earth? He who descended is he who also ascended far above all the heavens, that he might fill all things. There's a couple of ways to look at this. Okay? First of all, the very fact that God, in his eternity, wants to interact with us and condescends to become incarnate in his Son. or in the Son. I'm not quite sure, third party, how I'm saying this. Forget that. Okay, the Son became incarnate, descended to live amongst us, might be enough to fulfill that descended part. Or we might be talking about Holy Saturday, when he was in the tomb and he descended into the lower parts of earth so that he could raise the captives that were waiting there for him. What do I mean by that? Well, all the good people, all the people judged good by God who died before Jesus died on the cross, heaven wasn't open yet. The cross was open the gates. Come on in. But if you were good but died before then, even 1,000 years before then, God said, I'm going to put you in this holding room. It's not hell. It's limbo. It's whatever you want to call it. It's got air conditioning. It's got ping pong tables. You'll have fun. It'll be okay. This isn't really bad stuff, okay? But you're going to have to wait there, okay? Now, maybe it all happened in the blink of an eye, and they didn't seem like they were waiting there for 1,000 years. Or maybe it did. I don't know. But eventually they got to heaven, so it was worth it. So when he descended to the lower parts of the earth, at that point in time, he knows the gates of heaven are open. And now logically, because of our walk through time, it makes sense that now they can ascend to heaven. Does that make sense? Okay. So that might be what that means. I'm not quite sure. But then after the parentheses ends, he goes and says, and his gifts were that some should be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers, and he moves on from there. But look at this. Let's say that middle section, which is perhaps questionable because scholars differ on it. I gave you my best shot. Let's put a blanket over that for the moment. That is, if you're careful, you can see through that and see the words underneath, because I don't like to edit scripture. It's still there, but pretend for a moment it's not there. Look at what's above and below that parentheses, that tangent that Paul walked off on. But grace was given to each of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. And his gifts were that some should be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers. That flows, doesn't it? Paul went off on a tangent. And we can't make sense of the tangent. Or people have differing opinions on the tangent, let's say that. But the gifts were given by Christ through the Holy Spirit. And if you want to know more about the gifts of the Holy Spirit, go to 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and also chapter 14. But 12 is the main one, okay? Where it's talking about the dispersal of the gifts that you receive at confirmation. And so that we say, okay, some people are apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers. We don't know what we're going to get. It's a grab bag, okay? So if you want to know, go there. So that's that. Yes, okay. So from there, he continues on just after verse 11, and he starts talking about the fact that these gifts are meant to equip people for ministry. And the ultimate goal of equipping people for ministry is to build up the body of Christ. Okay? So the gifts are meant to equip people for ministry, and equipping people for ministry is to build up the body of Christ. Take out the middle portion, the gifts are to build up the body of Christ, which is what you'll see if you go to 1 Corinthians chapter 12 when they talk about the gifts. They're not ours. They're meant to be used to build us all up. That's what we're meant to do. If you've got a gift, it's meant to be used to help others. That's what it's meant to be used for. In verse 13, Paul starts talking about that this specifically, these gifts are meant to lead the members to the unity of faith. That phrase is unity of faith. Now the RSV, if you happen to have the RSV, it's translated a little bit better. It says the unity of the faith. See, we can have unity of faith. We can all believe. But what if we all believe in different things? Then we're not unified. But if we have unity of the faith, if we all believe the same thing, then we are unified. We recite the creed at Mass. Have you ever thought about how powerful that is in 30 seconds, 45 seconds it takes us to recite that? How incredible, how much information there is in there. It's incredible. And we recite it to remind us what we believe. We all believe that. Therefore, we are the yoke. We all see the world the same way, which is kind of neat. Now, Paul talks about this as he goes through verses 1 through 16. He's talking about the maturity in faith. And we're used to hearing about, be more mature in your faith, or words to that effect, right? Grow in your faith, be more mature in your faith. And we tend to think of that as a personal spiritual maturity. But what Paul's talking about here is the church. In a corporate sense, all of us as a body need to have spiritual maturity. And that's why unity is so important. We can't possibly raise ourselves up spiritually if we have all these different opinions. We're like the oxen pulling the cart in 2 different directions, or worse yet, in 70 different directions. Okay? So the unity of the faith is important because corporate, as a body, corporate spiritual maturity is what Paul's talking about here. Which then leads to a question. What does a mature, spiritually mature parish look like? And we can use this one as an example if we want to. Okay? Now there's 3 aspects that I can pull out of verses 1 through 16. 3 things that Paul talks about that are the hallmarks of a mature parish. We've just sort of gone through a bunch of them. Does anybody want to take a stab just for fun? Well, what? Unity. There you go. Unity actually figures into 2 of the things that are up here. First thing, right off the bat, right in verses, yep.
I was just going to add on to that. Apparently in verse 16 it says working properly.
Yes, that figures into the last one. Okay, so unity is in the first 2. The first unity that he was talking about was right off the bat when he was saying unity in relationships. Being humble, being gentle or meek, kindness, love, forbearing with one another. Okay, the unity that comes from that. Then he started talking about the unity and stability in doctrine. All believing in the same faith. The unity of the faith. That was in verses 13 through 15. And then fruitful ministry. Using the gifts that are given to the members under the guidance of the pastor. So we don't all go willy-nilly. Okay? And that shows up in verse 8, 11 through 12, and 16, just as Bray said. 16 starts talking about that as well. So, and if you don't trust me, go ahead and write it down. Check it out later. It's fine. So those 3 things are the hallmarks of a mature parish. When they exist, then the parish is spiritually mature. And if they're lacking there, then we need to work on it. Okay? So that takes us through verse 16. In verse 17, Paul says something that could be something kind of fun. Verse 4:17. What does he say here? Okay? Out of the RSV. He says, "Now this I affirm and testify in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do, in the futility of their minds." And he goes on from there. Who is he preaching to? The Gentiles. Here he's insulting the Gentiles. "Now this I affirm and testify in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do, in the futility of their minds." And he goes on from there. We're going to discuss where he goes on in a moment. How can he do this? Paul, in some other letter, I can't remember what it is, it's so beautiful. He says, "I try and be all things to all people so that I can win some." He's good at not offending people. And here he is saying, you must no longer live as the Gentiles do. And he's preaching to the Gentiles. So what does this mean? He doesn't consider them Gentiles anymore. They're of the faith now. He's saying, you must no longer live as those people you used to hang out with live. You've moved on from that. You don't live like that anymore. You need to live in accord with your new life. So that's what it means. The conduct needs to change to be in accord with their new identity. But I think it's funny. You Gentiles can't live as the Gentiles do anymore. It's just it's not going to win a lot of people over. Then he continues on from there in verse 18. So It says, you can no longer live as the Gentiles do in the futility of their minds. They are darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, due to their hardness of heart. There's a lot to unpack there. I'm going to unpack it real quick because some of this we're going to talk about in great length next week. Darkened in their understanding. That starts to bring out that shift from light to dark. The children of the light and the children of the dark. We're going to talk about that at length next week. There are some things that are very obvious about children of light and children of darkness, and then there's some very subtle things that can help us understand why some of the people in your life right now can't understand truth. They simply can't understand it. If I went off on this, I'd have nothing to talk about next week, so I'm not going to do that. Actually, there's a lot to talk about next week, but I'm not going to do that because I want to end on time. But there's some very subtle things that will help you understand why some of the people in your life cannot understand truth. It's unbelievable. And it comes from here in the Gospel of John. It's really interesting. Okay, but we're going to cover that next week. Now, when he says, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them. Ignorance is not a bad word. Now you can use it with a snide, sneer on your face and try and make it into a bad thing, but it's not. Ignorance means you don't know. An agnostic, which I was for the first 48 years of my life, doesn't know. I wasn't against God. I wasn't an atheist. I was an agnostic. I didn't know. Agnostic is very close to ignorance. It's the same root words. Okay? I didn't know that at the time, but throwing it out there now, you now know a little bit more about me. Okay, so ignorance isn't a bad word. But Paul goes on to say, the ignorance that is in them due to the hardness of their heart. Now, there's an indictment. The hardness of their heart. You can't penetrate a heart that is closed to God. Okay? God has immense gifts to give us. The grace is there, but we can block it. All we have to do is say, And he goes, okay. Does he have the power to knock your hand down? Yes, of course he does. But he's a gentleman. So he says, okay, you don't want me? Fine. Open up your heart. I'm there. Huh?
Free will.
Free will. I love free will. Okay? Talk about free will next week. Okay, finally. So that word hardness of their heart. The Greek word, I don't know if this is the last time I say Greek word. I don't know. So the Greek word that is translated as hardness is porosis. Osteoporosis, okay? Actually, there's a difference in there. You can think about that, but more specifically, and I didn't know this until I looked it up, there's a medical term called porosis. If you break your arm, where it knits back together, it's harder than the surrounding bone. First thing it does is create a callus, and that is hardness. That's the porosis. That hard seam that knits the bone together, that's a porosis. That's fine when you're knitting bone back together. It's not good when it's in your heart. So he's saying their ignorance is due to the hardness of their heart. They're not letting God in. So their ignorance is caused by them. Ignorance by itself is okay. Ignorance due to their hardness, not good. And then he continues from that. He says, due to the hardness of their heart, that they have become callous. Right? I just said callous. Hardness, callous, it goes together. And have given themselves up to licentiousness, greed, and we go into what we talked about last week, which I won't go into again. So as he goes through this, he's talking about the old life and the new and the rules for the new life, and he goes through all this. As you read that, those of you who read ahead of time and weren't counting on the screen, what kind of emphasis does Paul put on truthful speech? Does he think it's important, or it's not a big deal? It's important. Okay, I happen to agree with him. I hope we all agree. Paul thinks that truthful speech is incredibly important. Truth itself is very important. Truthful speech is super important. Okay? If we go to verse 22. 22. Put off your old nature, which belongs to your former manner of life. You Gentile people, you. Put off your old nature, which belongs to your former manner of life, and is corrupt through deceitful lusts. why does Paul put the word deceitful in there? Aren't you just simply corrupt through your lusts? And lusts, by the way, are all the sins, body and mind, like we talked about last week. It's not just lust. He's talking about all of the sins that can damage you. You are corrupt through your deceitful lusts. He puts in deceitful intentionally. We sin when we are deceived about what is good and what is bad. When we sin, it's because we view what we sin about as a good. That's why we do it. We are only attracted to good. We are deceived by the culture, by somebody, by an unformed conscience, by something. We are deceived in some manner and think that that thing that I should not do is a good, and therefore we do it. If you're constantly in confession, confessing the same sin over and over and over and over again, it's because you have not been convinced yet that that is a bad thing. You are deceived by your lust, by your sin. Paul is saying you are corrupted by your deceitful lusts. Someone is lying to us, and we're buying it. And we haven't quite convinced ourselves, or should I say, God has not quite convinced us that that's bad for you. So we keep doing it, because we are attracted to goods, but we are deceived. I can keep saying it many different ways, but I think it's a really important point, but I'll stop saying it, okay? You all got it? And anybody like going, what is he talking about? I'm not sure. Yes, Bray.
So I get your point. I guess I was just kind of wondering what you think of this. So I've been reading some of Karl Marx's old poetry.
I'm not a fan, but go ahead.
But so, Nowhere in Mind, one of the things that he talks about is that how, I forget which one, but Karl Marx does talk about in one of his poems how that his soul used to belong to God, but he voluntarily sold it to the devil. So from my point of view, that kind of almost makes it seem that Karl Marx, when he was writing the manifesto, actually knew that he was choosing evil and voluntarily forsaking that to God. So would it be right to say that Karl Marx was deceived?
That's a really good question, and again, in order to finish on time, I'm going to try and answer this in 30 seconds. If this doesn't satisfy you, let's talk afterward, because I find that to be a very interesting question. In my point, as far as I'm concerned, there are, if you look at the world today, there are a relative handful of truly evil people out there. They've sold themselves to the devil. They're actively doing evil. They know they're doing evil. They're very, very clever. And they sell a lie to all of these people here who have a good heart, and they buy the lie. And they follow the lie, thinking they're doing good, when they're actually pursuing an evil path. Okay? Small number of good people lie to a large number of good-hearted people doing evil. And then there's us good people over here.
Humble too.
Now,
And
huh?
And humble.
And humble. Yeah, right, I forgot. Us good people, really humble. Okay? Quick little answer to your question. But yeah, yes, I would argue that yes, there are people who are not deceived about it, but I think they're in the minority. Most people are deceived by someone or something, and we're in this microwave culture. So if that oh, you're saying that's good? Okay, I always wanted to do that. You're saying that's good? I'm going to go with that. Boom. They deceive. Now sometimes they willingly go along with the deception. Okay, but if I go on that too far, I'm going to be late, and I don't want to hold you guys up. So I'm going to move on from there. But it's a really good question. So I was once having a conversation, and I just looked out at the time, and I realized I got to talk fast. Okay. We might go 5 minutes over, because I just looked at what I got left, and we might go 5 minutes over. I was having lunch one day with Father Gavin over at Ascension, and over at Mississippi Sweets, we're having ribs, although that really doesn't factor into the story. I'll just set the stage so you know where we're going. We're having ribs, and as we tend to do when we're sitting around talking, we end up going into theology, and we try and figure out the mind of God and why this does this, and try and figure out how everything works together. We just have really fun conversations like that. And I can't remember exactly how the conversation went into this next phase, but it was a very interesting thing. And eventually, the question at the table was, if free will allows us to sin, and there is no sin in heaven, can we have free will in heaven?
Satan did.
Well, yeah, but Satan's no longer there. He was kicked out. And we're not allowed to be kicked out of heaven. Okay? So if God allows us to have our free will, and we can at any moment choose evil, choose to do something wrong, spit our gum out on the sidewalk or something, and rightfully be kicked out of heaven, but that can't happen. As you see this logical contradiction, how does this happen? Okay? Now I look at that and I go, this is very offensive to me to think that free will be removed from us in heaven. But there's this contradiction of how in the world can we be in heaven with free will and be guaranteed that we don't sin? We're not going to sin in heaven, but why are we not going to sin in heaven?
Because we're in the presence of God.
Our will is perfectly conformed to God, yes, absolutely. But the temptations are missing because we're no longer deceived. Think about this. Think about this. Have you all heard, this was one of these high school pranks, at least when I was growing up. Pouring sugar in a gas tank. Have you ever heard of that? You pour sugar in a gas tank, you really mess up the engine. I don't know if that's true or not, but you know what I'm talking about? Has anybody had it happen and had that? Okay, so you pour sugar in a gas tank, that's really, really bad for the engine. Let's say we know that. But think about this. When we leave here tonight, you're all going to go home. You got sugar somewhere in your house, right, in the cupboard and wherever. You have a car parked out front. You have the free will to take that sugar, go out, and pour it in your gas tank. Are you going to? No. Why?
You know it's bad.
You know it's bad. Your deceitful lusts. We are tricked into sinning. Can you imagine if every sin that you're tempted by, you know that well? I'm not going to pour sugar in my gas tank. I'm not going to drop a big, heavy hammer on my foot. I have the free will to do so. I'm not going to do it because I know that that's bad. What if every sin that you're tempted by, you knew that well? You can have free will, you'd never sin. Isn't that great?
Yeah.
You are corrupted by your deceitful lusts. Paul's brilliant. Paul is absolutely brilliant. Concupiscence. Absolutely. So, okay, so we're at the end of chapter 4. But if for those of you that read ahead of time, you know that section doesn't actually end at the end of chapter 4. It goes on for another 2 verses. So we have to go 2 verses into chapter 5 to finish this section. So we'll just do that for those of you who stopped right at the end of chapter 4 like you were supposed to. Okay? Although you can always read ahead. Paul's talking about all of this old and new, and let no evil talk come out of your mouth, and be edifying and impart grace, and no longer steal, but let him labor, and all of these different things. And then he goes into the last 2 verses. Therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. And that's how that section ends. We're now 2 verses into chapter 5. We do chapter 5, the rest of chapter 5 next week. But I'll talk about in a second. So let me close with a relatively quick personal story that might help tie this together when we're talking about truth and everything. Paul talks a lot about deception and truth. It's important to him, and it's really, really important to me. I spent much of the last 10 or 15 years, for the lack of a better term, on a personal crusade to try and figure out what truth and lies are, because the world is getting increasingly difficult in this world to tell the difference between a truth and a lie. And I sort of sense that, and I've been thinking about this for the last quite some time, because truth seems to be disappearing in the world. I told you the first time we got together, I spent the first 48 years of my life without faith. And this sense that I had a while back that truth was disappearing from the world. I'm a science and math guy. I like chewing on facts. Give me the raw data. Let me chew on it. Let me figure this stuff out. I love working with facts. And these facts were like disappearing. They were just poof. They were just, and there's nothing more to chew on. Where's truth? I can't find it. the disappearance of truth itself was one of the things that led me to faith. Because even as an unbeliever and as an agnostic, not opposed to God, but I couldn't believe. I tried to, but I couldn't believe. Even as an unbeliever, something in my heart told me that if there was one last place on earth that truth existed, it was in here.
Amen.
I knew it. That's as an unbeliever, someone who didn't believe in God, didn't believe in the Bible, was raised in a household that mocked people of faith. And that's where I thought truth was. And that led me to follow Lucy into Bible study, where a short time later I was facilitating the Bible study as the only unbeliever in the room. Strange story. So how do you tell truth from a lie? How do you do that? Okay, especially when the whole world seems to be getting very good at lying to us.
Word. Stay in the Word.
Stay in the Word. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Okay? Logic can help us catch lies. Because if you know certain things to be absolutely true, because you've got personal experience, when something comes along and is counter to that, you can recognize a lie. But it's very, very hard to affirm a truth, a new truth that comes to you. How do you do that? Okay? I have found a guide, very, very much along stay in the Word. I found a guide, and it comes from Paul. It's another one of Paul. Okay? And it comes to one that we've hit before. Galatians 5:19-21 verses 5:22-23. We've talked about the first one a lot. The first one is the works of the flesh. The flesh being sarx, our fallen nature. The works of the flesh are immorality, impurity, licentiousness, idolatry, sorcery, hatreds, rivalry, jealousy, outbursts of fury, acts of selfishness, dissensions, factions, occasions of envy, and the list goes on. But 5:22 is the fruit of the Spirit. The Spirit's in charge of truth. And the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, or meekness, and self-control. Do you guys each know somebody in this camp? Do you each know somebody in this camp? Which one do you trust? You just naturally have the same feeling I do. This is a truth detector for me. If they're speaking from the place of the Spirit, now it's not perfect, okay? But if they're speaking from a place of the Spirit is truth. Works of the flesh or not. So I look at this as a truth detector. It's really important to me. About 7 or 8 years ago, there was a first-class relic of, is it Pope St. John Paul II or St. Paul Pope John Paul II? You know who I'm talking about. There was a first-class relic of that man traveling around the United States. And then it ended up in Coral Springs at one point. So Lucy and I, being Catholic geeks, we wanted to go down and visit the first-class relic. It was a container of glass with some of his blood in it. It's a first-class relic. It's part of the saint. And there's a neat little thing that if a first-class relic touches another object, that other object becomes a third-class relic. Okay? So not only did we want to be in its presence, we also wanted to bless. I don't know what you call it. Anoint? Whatever you want to call it. We wanted to make something else a third-class relic. So I took my Bible, which was very important to me. It happens to be that first page of Ephesians, where I keep saying go back, and that's where you see this. That first page of Ephesians, I don't know if you can see, if you're not in the front row and have really good eyes, you're not going to be able to see this, but this is the only page in my entire Bible that happens to have a rip in it. I don't know why, it just works out that way. And it houses one of my absolutely favorite verses in the entire Bible. I've taped it up. I took this down to where they had it. I can't remember which church it was. It was down in Coral Springs. And Lucy and I waited in line. And then we got up and we saw the very kindly nun who was in charge of the little glass thing. And we introduced ourselves and we said hello. She asked us some questions. We told her all this kind of stuff. And we wanted this touched and we wanted our wedding rings touched. When it came time to do it, I opened it up to Galatians 5:22-23, which is highlighted. And I said, that's where I want you to touch it. And this little cute little seemingly frail woman takes this glass thing, and I'm thinking she's just sort of going to touch it, maybe say something. She goes to touch it, and she just goes to go, turn the page, turn the page, go to the back, inside front cover. She just starts rubbing this thing like crazy. This thing is a serious third-class relic, guys. I'm telling you. This might even be a second-class relic. That's not true. It's only a third-class relic. I'm just kidding. And our wedding rings are third-class relics, because we also did the same thing. Because this is my greatest lie and truth detector. Okay? When someone is displaying this, I know they're not, at least not fully in the Spirit. And therefore, they may be deceived or trying to deceive me. I don't know which. But it might come from a place of untruth. And if they're fully here, I know that their heart's right. I know the Spirit is guiding them. And it's much greater chance that what they're telling me is the truth. So, if you like that idea and you want to use these, if I happen to have inspired you for that, I'm going to give you 2 caveats. Number 1, you can't use this on news anchors. You can't, and there's a very good reason you can't. The news anchors are reading words from somebody else. They're not emotionally invested. So whatever might come out of them doesn't come out. Now, if you heard it from the person who originally wrote it, you might get a feeling. But these people are just meant to, there's no emotion, you can't do it, okay? So you can't use this on news anchors. You shouldn't be listening to news anchors anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
That's my political comment for the day, I'm done, okay? The other caveat, I shouldn't have gone there, I really shouldn't have gone there. The other caveat is that someone who is exhibiting righteous anger isn't necessarily over here. Righteous anger can still be here. If you are truly upset about something that's immoral, sinful, against the will of God, and you know it, and you need to fight for it, and you're angry about it, you can be right here. But you can be speaking this loud, but you're still here. So use your discernment when you're talking with somebody who's righteously angry. Make sure that what they're angry about is something that is correct to be angry about. Okay. Righteous anger, right? Paul talks about it in chapter 4. Be angry, but do not sin. Right? You read that. Be angry, but do not sin. Being angry is not a sin. Going too far. Like Lucy's telling me, I'm gone too far. Going too far, that's a sin. Okay? So you can be angry, but do not sin about it. Last thing. Talking about next week. A minute and I'm done. We're going to go into children of dark and children of the light. Okay, and how those two are different, and there's really some really cool, subtle things about it. We're going to talk about what is morality and how to define it, how to defend it, okay, and a whole bunch of different things, and what C.S. Lewis thinks about it, which is really cool. Okay, but here's the one thing I want to encourage you, exhort you, and warn you about. The end of chapter 5 of Ephesians is one of the most controversial parts of the entire Bible. It's controversial because the culture at large would like to prime you to think that Paul is a misogynist, that he doesn't like women. That couldn't be further from the truth. If you read it properly, you will see that Paul believes in the equal dignity of husband and wife. Read it with the proper mindset. We'll discuss it at length when we get together next week. Paul loves both men and women, and he's talking to Christian husbands and wives about an unbelievably beautiful synergy that comes between them when they're of the right mindset. It's absolutely beautiful and life-changing and world-changing. With that having been said,